Democracy is sweet, like a banana. In fact, bananas might just be the best representation of the fruits of democracy. I mean, our democracy acquired a ton of them through the use of power politics and the formulation of banana republics. Born out of the great US of A, the United Fruit Company was able to ravage Central America for all their worth in their bananas in the mid-20th century. By the 1920s, they had already accrued 70% of all banana trade. These to-be-developed countries needed to accommodate for American investment. And how do you do this? Well, the best way is to make your country seem very exploitable. So in order to accommodate the investors, they would block social reform and strike down on left-wing opposition. And once you have politics under your thumb, you can just start buying a ton of land in these countries and start building your railroads and start building ports for your steamships, which you'll call banana boats because they're white and funny looking. And then you make a boatload, or should I say a boatload of money, and life is good. So we ended up accidentally making a little bit of infrastructure progress and modernizing the economy a little bit more, while still making these to-be-developed countries heavily dependent on the US to prop up its economy and be the major recipient of their exports. So they don't get completely shafted out of the deal, but their government is still highly unstable and constantly becoming corrupt by trying to see who can brown nose the US the best. But our democracy is good to go. Our stability was allowed us to create incredible infrastructure that could make the production of these resources highly profitable. So is this unyielding proof that democracy has its flaws and that exploitation is always going to be a factor within democracies? Maybe. Hard to say. What it does show is that democracy alone cannot get you equality and good moral value as you would want. You can't just have democracy and everything just flows along. There's still work to be done. But let's keep going and try to explain what's really going on here and if democracy can grant us all the things that we expect it to be able to do. And, maybe we're just being too hard on democracy. I mean, when the alternative is just listening to some extremely powerful dude, then it makes sense that you would want to promote equality and freedom and having everybody have a say. But if democracy is so great, why does no one use it? I mean, sorry, not nobody. Switzerland, you're just not in the group chat. Like we forget sometimes. It's just so Switzerland's government runs on like what's called a direct democracy, but it's more like a half direct democracy, I guess. It's a little confusing, but technically, I guess that's more accurate. There are one big difference on each of the three branches, separate from the US. So executive branch is different because instead of one, there's 7, and they make up 4 of their biggest parties, their political parties. They're pretty politically diverse, or whatever you might want to call it. Their political landscape is very rich, very rich and nutritious. Yes, yum. So they have 4 main political parties, which split amongst themselves among the 7. So 2, 2, 2, 1. Yes. And so legislative branch, this is the interesting one. They have referendums, and basically, they vote for their lower chamber thing. It's just the House of Representatives, and then their upper chamber, it's just the Senate. It's like the exact same thing. They vote on those guys as normal. They make laws and stuff as normal. But they have 3 types of referendums, which are popular votes on specific laws instead of voting on people to implement the laws. The first referendum is the popular initiative. This is where some, Jeffrey the chocolatier gets this cool idea for, making chocolate universally free, and everybody gets chocolate in the morning, and then he gets a bunch of Jeffrey and his pals sign a bunch of signatures and then make everybody vote on whether or not to implement a new law that says everybody gets chocolate for free. Sick. Anyway, referendum number 2 is optional referendum. the houses make this law, and then everybody now has to vote. Is this law cool or does it not fly? It's like they're like vetoing the law, which is like sick. The people can veto basically, but it doesn't have to go through them. It's only when it's a specific law. Like I said, Carl and all of his buddies need to create signatures to start up the referendum. It's not like an obligatory one like the mandatory referendums are. Now, the mandatory referendums are when they're trying to make a constitutional change in which everybody's got to be on the same page about that, and there's got to be a double acceptance, two thumbs up. You got to get the majority of the cantons. They're just little government, they work like states, and you got to get the majority of the people. You can implement that and create a new constitutional amendment just like that. Well, it takes like a couple years maybe, and there's got to be like the counter proposal thing too, and so you got 3 referendums. They're all pretty cool, pretty neato. But what is the last thing? Judicial. Yes, judicial. The one big change here is they have the federal Supreme Court, but it's not really the Supreme Court. They don't have any judicial oversight. And if you don't know, in the U.S., there's oversight. So if the Supreme Court can deem legislative laws unconstitutional and be like, get it out of here, that's not allowed. And then now you might be saying, well, what the heck? Where's the oversight? We need checks and we need balances. It's in the people. They can make referendums to say unconstitutional. Well, Pam. We're going to talk more about this later. But so you got this cool system, 3 big differences, and 3 referendums, and 3 branches. We're loving 3s here. So this system, it's similar to the U.S., but it's democracy-arized, half more directly democratizing. What's the problem? What's the flaws here? The video is about democracy flaws, and we haven't even got to any flaws. Here are 2 right for you. The first one is logistical. I mean, Switzerland's kind of small. Their biggest referendum in 2016, they got 3.3 million votes. But that's all things considered across all of Switzerland. That's not a ton. In contrast, if you take New York City, also 8-ish million people, also 5-ish million registered voters, and also in the 2020 primary election, there was around 3-ish million votes. And that's just New York City. That's just in the 5 boroughs, brother. So you can imagine you scale New York City sized across entire country, and then you take that and then you just chuck it across the entire US. That might be kind of hard to do. We already have issues with election counting stuff. We're not really sure how to do it. We're not very good at it yet. It's, taking a couple hundred years, or it might take a couple hundred more. So logistical issues. We got too many people. Kind of tough. But this issue isn't like a huge one. In contrast, this issue number 2 far outshadows issue number 1, like completely. Problem number 2. That's an issue right there. Why don't you come around back and I'll show you what I mean. So these squares here are freedom-loving, great citizens, upstanding. They done nothing wrong. They like to vote. They're politically savvy or whatnot. Maybe they're not. Who knows? But they're not bad people. Whereas these squares, oh geez, look at this guy. These are anti-democrats. And no, this isn't political yet. Anti-democrats, I would say, they're probably like people who want to undermine the democracy and want to maybe like overthrow the government, or they just don't like equality for everybody. They want, maybe they're supremacists. Those are that nasty people I'm talking about. Here's your issue, is if you're trying to make a popular vote out of all of these people, then, the anti-democrats are going to kind of throw a wrench in the works. They're not going to create the amount of progress that you're really hoping for in a democracy. And so there's this issue because, the worst scenario is they spread their beliefs to other people, and, maybe like this guy becomes an anti-democrat too, and he's like, I want to be an anarchist, let's go. And then you slowly amass a larger and larger population, and if they go completely unchecked, then they might overthrow your democracy in the worst case, or at the very least create resistance to some kind of progress. You are unable to create progress because of all these dang anti-democrats. Well, there's actually a really simple solution. All you got to do is, take these guys over here. I think you're all set there, like you got this voting populace of freedom-loving, true Americans, and then, those guys over there, and like, shoot, I think we made racism. The tricky thing here is we're trying to protect people. We're trying to protect the rights and freedoms and equality of all. But in order to do that, is it justifiable and, excusable to restrict the rights of some people in that endeavor? Like, jail objectively restricts the rights of people. But if someone's going around murdering and, you don't want to be murdered, so you stop them from murdering so that you're not murdered because you don't want to be murdered, and that makes sense. That's logical. But should we stop them from voting too? Procon.org is a pretty good site if you haven't been on it before. Basically, if you have this belief or viewpoint, you can look it up on procon.org and see what the pros and cons are on that political stance. The subsection we're looking at today is felony voting. Most of the US is either you can vote after you get out of prison, or if you've done something worse than murder or something worse, you can't vote anymore. Never ever. And I think, obviously there's also a ton of legislature and like weird little rules and cracks, which makes it like really difficult for felons to re-register to vote, and like it's a whole different process, and there's unwritten laws where like it just makes things really difficult. But check your state below to see if you can vote if you've murdered somebody. I think it's universal, or generally universal, where that's kind of the line. If you behave in an anti-democratic way, there might be justification to suppress your vote. Like murdering, if you kill somebody, you're restricting their right to live, and it's not very equal. It's not in the name of equality to steal someone's life, I guess is a way you could put it. But outside of all of that, keeping it equal, keeping it fresh, keeping it 100, that makes sense. Unless they're children, they suck. They're stupid. Don't let them vote. We think about, we can't let kids vote because they're undeveloped. That makes sense. They don't have the responsibility. They're not involved in the society. But let's just, hey, why make it an age thing? Like, then you got to check their license and stuff. Let's just make it easy. Let's just have a test beforehand to make sure that people are mature and, can take on the responsibility of voting. Let's just test them to... Let's just test the people at that point. Once you get there, then... So, you see it's a problem. You can't... It's hard to define what makes some people fair and eligible voters and some people not. What is the line that you draw? There could be an argument for, terminally ill people will never see the fruits of their vote. So after a certain time, if they've only got 2 months left to live, then just restrict it because it doesn't matter to them anyway. I think that's wrong, but why is it wrong? What's the distinction that makes that an issue? Who do we get to say can and cannot? And it feels like it's just precedent on whatever has been in the system for a while. It just continues to be in the system. Children can't vote because they couldn't vote before, and that's a fair thing. Governments are slow, but we got to think about these things because things don't change unless we think about them really hard. Let's go back to the judicial branch of Switzerland. So the problem with no oversight and that people have ultimate control is you can have very temporary movements that convince a lot of people very quickly to believe in a certain thing. And that could just go through. That goes through everything. There's nothing to stop it because there's no unconstitutional check and balance on it besides the popular vote of the people. This has been seen as a major weakness in their half-direct democracy, but it exists universally. Anti-democratic views without some form of suppression will inevitably, if they're popular enough, be implemented into a society constitutionally, democratically, and legally. A big concept is UCA, which is unconstitutional constitutional amendments. And this is basically what I'm describing of you build up this, you make this amendment that contradicts the values that you're trying to create with the Constitution originally. And so how do you deal with unconstitutional constitutional amendments? One way to do this is by just having like a certain amount that are just fixed and you can't move them, and that's a way to circumvent it, is just solidify what you do know. This exists in Germany. It's referred to as the Eternity Clause, where their system of government cannot be manipulated or affected. You can't make an amendment that just abolishes the judicial branch. It's just not, you can't, there's nothing you can do about that. It's just what it is. That's like the baseline of the baseline, because the Constitution and the laws and the Constitution and then like the really important constitutional stuff. But as with anything, it's not foolproof. You can't fully prevent all anti-democratic change without some kind of oversight. And the problem is even if you have that oversight, say, the Supreme Court in America, you have the oversight, but sometimes it just doesn't matter, because you can also have situations where you can prove things are unconstitutional, even if they are. There's always a way to resist it and make it difficult, which is good when the amendments are unconstitutional, but it's bad when the amendments are necessary and important to you. It's not so easy to determine right and wrong when your scales for right and wrong are the general consensus of the people. This plays back into suppression. If you live in a corrupted society that has unconstitutional beliefs, then you're suppressing all these different groups under the guise that it's justified and constitutional. And so you're just picking and removing rights of people while thinking that you're not, while thinking that you're promoting and protecting the rights of people by removing it from others. So what are we doing here? What's going on? I'm trying to communicate the idea that democracy is great. Everybody loves it from a conceptual standpoint. But you can't just close your eyes and say, I'm doing democracy now. This is beautiful. Because it's very easy to find anti-democratic beliefs and values within a democratic environment. And so we have to be really careful about specifically stripping and suppressing the rights and beliefs of other people. Whether or not it's justifiable is up to you, but that's the problem, is when it's up to you, you get to, it could just be really wrong and messed up and you won't even know because you think it's good because you decided to do it, right? So we have to be really careful about who we suppress and if it's worth it and whether or not there is a threat to democracy and what we need to do to protect and uphold that. We don't want to be too gung-ho about protecting our values, because when we're trying our hardest to defend our beliefs is when we undermine those beliefs and values the most. Okay, thanks. Bye.